So we will now pass over to Michal. He is who has been working in the nature-based solution landscape for many, many years. He works in DG CLIMA in the European Commission, and recently he's been involved with the Czech presidency over the European Council. And he's going to hopefully give us some interesting insights into COP, which John mentioned, but also into the policy regarding NBS more widely on a European level, and perhaps one or two little projects from further afield as well. So over to you, Michal.
Thanks a lot, and good afternoon. You may know, or you may not, that both David and myself, we come from a landlocked country, Czechia, and that is why I think we are the best place to be here moderating and speaking at this conference. I'll take you from a global perspective to the EU perspective to a national perspective in 20 minutes max. And then what I'm looking forward in particular is that for the rest of the conference, I'll learn from you, because I'm really proud and really honored to be part of such a group of people and experts who are not talking about things, but who are doing these things. So this will be a little bit of the structure. I had a chance to participate in the recent COP27 that ended about two weeks ago, and I'll share with you a few gossips, outcomes, photos that are to a certain extent relevant to nature-based solutions. Then a little bit of the EU legislation funding instruments, then something about the conference that we organized recently in Prague, the Czech Republic, and a little bit from my experience from Nicaragua as a teaser, and we can come back to it in our discussion. So starting with the COP, for those who are not that familiar with the issue, COP stands for Conference of Parties of United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So here at really the global level, some 200 countries come together. You would remember that in Glasgow we had the last very successful COP. The one in Egypt this year was much less successful. What usually is being discussed are four issues: mitigation, adaptation, finance, and loss and damage. The picture is rather sad, because even if we know we have a problem since 1972, or let's say since 1990, since the first IPCC report, we have not managed to do much in terms of mitigation globally. In Europe, much better, but globally, not much. In adaptation, we are trying here and elsewhere to do as much as we can. However, the focus of this conference was on the impacts of climate change and what to do about the loss and damage of the impacts of climate change. So the key aspects of the circumstances of the COP27 were first extreme weather events during this year, the flooding in Pakistan and other places, droughts in the US and other parts of the world, forest fires, etc. Even more diverging interests of parties. Then the role of the Egyptian COP presidency, that was everything but an honest broker, and from the very beginning they made it clear, you got what you wanted in Glasgow, we'll get at our African COP what we want. And they did very well on that, yeah? They were not really on our side. And then war in Ukraine, the energy and food prices. I'll touch a little bit upon geopolitics, trust, and human rights if you want, yeah, in the discussion. A few pictures. The COP takes place in several rooms. This is the plenary. The President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, but also the UK Prime Minister, the French President, the Belgian, Dutch, just about everybody, all the way to the President Biden, presenting what they are going to do in the months and years to come when it comes to mitigation, adaptation, etc. This is a little bit of, of the internal cuisine, the European Union of coordination, where we miss our British colleagues a lot. One of the events where, on contrary, the British can be very, very proud of, I'll come to it, 10-point financing for biodiversity, 10-point plan for financing biodiversity, with at least two British states of secretary or ministers, Therese Coffey and Lord Zach Goldsmith, but also with participation of other ministers and leaders of states, and I'll again come back to that. At the COP, you have all the press conferences. Here's Franz Timmermans, backed by about 15 ministers of the EU, of the environment and foreign affairs, talking about our plan. Some sad stories. I've been crying at least 5 times during the COP. This is a guy from Tuvalu. His story was, I'm 26 years old, and I know already now that I'll not be able to spend my, I'll not be able to live in Tuvalu when I'll be old. And as all of these events, it ended not Friday evening as envisaged, but on Sunday, like 9:15 in the morning. Very quickly on the outcomes. Unfortunately, we have not achieved much on the mitigation side. What we are trying desperately to achieve is to get an agreement on the phase out of all fossil fuels. For the time being, there is agreement only on phase down of unabated coal power generation. For phase out of fossil fuels, we've got a huge coalition of countries. Some 80 countries said they would be in favor of that. But some, like China, India, and others, unfortunately, managed to block an agreement and then peaking greenhouse gas emissions by 2025. You may be familiar with the fact that even if we are trying everything we possibly can, the curve of greenhouse gas emissions is still rising. So we absolutely need to make a turn and have the greenhouse gas emissions peak by 2025, the latest. Also on the commitments, we had not much of a progress. On the biodiversity, there was a lot of agreement, and it was stressed in the final decisions that it is an important issue. If we lose it on biodiversity, we lose it also on climate change. On adaptation, that is much closer to the topic of this conference, so-called global goal on adaptation. Again, not much of a progress, only a broad agreement that we will focus on the most vulnerable countries. At least an agreement that adaptation should really be on equal footing with mitigation, including when it comes to money. And then once again, the challenge identified was that measuring impact remains challenging when it comes to adaptation as compared to mitigation, the tons of CO2. And, nature-based solutions were highlighted as one of the most important issues. So, on finance, you may know that we've got the objective of $100 billion a year, and unfortunately, we are not yet there. We are somewhere at 85 at the moment, and on the doubling of adaptation funding, we are currently on some $20 billion a year. We have not progressed much. At least there is a commitment to double it to 40 billion a year, but still a long way to go. And there is an article in the Paris Agreement 21C saying that all financial flows should be consistent with a pathway towards low greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilient development. And again, not much of a progress was achieved there. And on loss and damage, there was a big battle that here at least we won. in the sense that all countries that used to be developing countries in 1992 came up with an idea of having a fund where they would be beneficiaries, meaning China, meaning India, meaning Saudi Arabia, and the main oil exporters, saying we should be on the beneficiary side. And we said, no, 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 this is not perhaps the way how it should work. And at least we managed to agree that the loss and damage fund would be for the most vulnerable countries, and that the base of donors should be broadened. So the countries that used to be maybe developing in 1992 should be now more on the donor side, and also there should be much more important role of multilateral development banks and private sector. What is much more relevant to this event is so-called ENACT initiative that you may have heard of. It stands for Enhancing Nature-Based Solutions for an Accelerated Climate Transformation. It's an initiative of Germany, Egypt, and IUCN. And there are three main objectives. First, resilience for approximately 1 billion vulnerable people around the globe, 2.4 billion hectares of sustainable agricultural systems, and protecting, conserving, and restoring carbon-rich terrestrial and also ocean ecosystems. The 10-point plan for financing biodiversity that I mentioned, an excellent initiative by the UK, where they got on board Ecuador, Gabon, and Maldives. So very broad participation in terms of both geography and this, let's say, global north and south. Very practical approach, saying we don't need any new institutions. We need to gather the money very quickly, and basically we need to get more financing from developed countries, emerging economies, multilateral development banks, private companies, and we should be creating partnerships. Another very sad story was presented by the Minister of Maldives, saying basically that the highest point of Maldives is less than 2 meters above sea level, and describing the consequences of business as usual. Moving to the second part of my presentation, the European Union. You would have been familiar with most of the issues, but just to list the most recent instruments, the EU Adaptation Strategy that was adopted in February 2020, if I'm not wrong, and that focuses on nature-based solutions and picks up nature-based solutions as the key instrument for implementing adaptation in the EU in the future. EU Biodiversity Strategy and the very recent EU Nature Restoration Law. It's something that we wanted to do already decades ago, but finally here there is a proposal on the table of the EU Restoration Law saying we should not do only conservation, but we should go one step further. We should go to restoration. EU Soil Framework, the proposal is ready, the proposal by the Commission, and EU Forest Strategy. Yeah, except for the Biodiversity Strategy and Adaptation Strategy, the three last pieces of policy and legislation still needs to go through a decision-making process through Council and Parliament. Here you will get, of course, the presentation. Here you can click some of the what I would consider very useful tools that can be used by practitioners. Most of them are listed on Climate Adapt website. I hope most of you would be familiar. If not, click Climate Adapt. and there you have plenty of best practices, good examples, tools, etc. And here is a list of some of the portals, handbooks, policy support facility, and also what is called EU mission on adaptation. That's a new student in the class. You may have heard about the 5 new EU missions. One of them is on climate change adaptation, trying to help selected regions to adapt to climate change using pilot innovative transformative projects. So if you're if you like, you may like to look at this mission on adaptation. When it comes to funding, I had an opportunity to negotiate with several countries, including yours, when it comes to resilience and recovery facility, cohesion policy, common agriculture policy, and always, or very often, the story was as follows. The member states' administrations were much more in favor of gray infrastructure rather than nature-based solutions for various reasons that I hope we will be able to discuss. They're pointing out that how difficult it is to set up indicators and measure impact of nature-based solutions. They were pointing at low visibility of nature-based solutions as compared to gray infrastructure. What we managed to do in most of the cases was to agree to support some pilot projects to demonstrate that nature-based solutions do function, and what, at least my conclusion is, that what we need most is a sort of mind shift from, let's say, the old thinking of gray infrastructure to nature-based solutions. Getting to the third part of my presentation, this is the conference that we organized recently in September in Prague, the Czech Republic. Maybe some of you have heard or even participated. It was called Designing Climate Resilient Landscapes, and I have a few brochures, and of course you can look it up then on the website. One of the main outcomes of this conference was so-called Prague Appeal. I'll get back to that. That was agreed by, let's say, leading and recognized practitioners participating in the conference, and later endorsed by all environment ministers of the EU member states. And also in the brochure you will find approximately 20 really transformative, innovative projects that could be inspirational for you. When I should talk about, let's say, what was innovative, I would say this was the holistic approach. That we had not only the water people talking to water people and soil people talking to the soil people, but we put everybody in the room and tried to come up with solutions that were good for water retention in the landscape, for soil regeneration, for forest resilience, for biodiversity, all with the objectives of recovery of ecosystem services and in the framework of a landscape approach. And the Prague Appeal, and it's also on the website, is also part of the brochure, basically outlined the common elements of successful innovative projects, outlined obstacles for implementation of such projects, and I guess we'll discuss it later during the conference, and then talked about investing in nature-based solutions and how to get banks and private sectors on board, maybe also insurance companies, and pointing out that all institutions, being public, private, and individuals, should be part of the process. And last two slides, I had an opportunity to work for 4 years in Nicaragua. Not that we would be able to plant back mangroves here in our environment. However, my experience from there was that the eldest persons in the communities came up saying, this is how it used to be 50, 60, 70 years ago. And they were joined by the experts coming in and saying, look, the climate change models tell us it will be like there. And combining the two, I believe, made a good result of some of the projects. And I have to confess, I became a little bit more radical when I have always have to fight for nature-based solutions against gray solutions. So I have to admit that sometimes combining the two in a way of sort of green-gray infrastructure, at least to start with, makes sense. And the examples presented in the video show that indeed might make sense. In the tropical countries that I'm talking, I'm more familiar with, we're talking not only about mangroves, but also coral reefs and sort of breakwaters and fences made of natural materials. And I can also recommend Conservation International, a US-based NGO that is very advanced and very experienced on green infrastructure. You may like to have a look at that. That's it, and I'm very much looking forward for the discussion, and thanks a lot for your attention.